capra ignorante!
Hello guys and welcome back to the 37th episode of Italian Politician of the Week. I am Ipernick and I make weekly videos on Italian history and politics in English. On the 30th of April 1993, hundreds of people gathered around the main entrance of Hotel Raffaele in Rome. There they waited for arguably the most powerful man in Italy, Bettino Craxi, secretary of the Italian Socialist Party. The moment he appeared, many young people started throwing coins at him and waving bills of 1,000 lire to taunt him. Craxi, alongside his collaborators, rushed to his car, where he was hastily taken away. This event marks the end of the First Republic and all that it stood for, as well as Craxi's political career. If you already watched my video on Cossiga and Scalfaro, you would know exactly what I'm talking about. But in summary, Italy in the 80s was led by the Pentapartito, an alliance of 5 parties that basically had a monopoly of power in the country and always ended up having its men as prime ministers. Bettino Craxi, Giulio Andreotti and Arnaldo Forlani were the big 3 responsible for this system. Forlani was the secular bureaucrat, Andreotti the eloquent statist, and Craxi, well, Craxi was the star. But how did we get to this? Today Craxi is either perceived as the most vile symbol of corruption or as the first victim of the justice system. Either way, his impact to the history of this country is incomparable. So let's start from the beginning. Craxi was born in 1934 in Milan. There's not much to say about him before the 1970s. He was a party activist for the Socialists since the 50s. He was elected into parliament in 1968. Things started to get serious in 1976 when party secretary Francesco De Martino wrote a spicy article in the newspaper Avanti, which led to the fall of Moro's fourth cabinet in 1976. Since no other party coalition seemed to be possible at the time between the left-wing currents of Democrazia Cristiana and the Socialists, President at the time Giovanni Leone called for new elections. The results took a lot of people by surprise. The Communists under Berlinguer won 34% of the votes, while the DC under Benigno Zaccagnini 38%. But what about the Socialists? The Socialists, who were already losing ground for a while, dropped from 10 to 9%. Faced with another loss, De Martino resigned from his position and the leadership put Craxi there instead. Initially, Craxi was supposed to be a placeholder, somebody who just remained there until things calmed down, but it didn't go that way. When it came down to forming a new government, Moro was still dedicated to forming a center-left government. But with that small 9%, the Socialists couldn't be relied upon anymore, and so Moro looked at Berlinguer and proposed him a compromise, the historical compromise, a cabinet with both the DC and the PCI. That was Moro's plan, and Berlinguer liked that idea, because that would have given him access to some ministries. The Prime Minister was not going to be an easy choice for such an unlikely alliance, but Leone suggested Andreotti, a man of the right, who was, after all, the master of compromise. The implications of such a pair are many, but today I want to focus on one in particular, which is the fate of the other parties. If the 2 biggest parties team up, then what use do the small parties have? The Republicans, the Social Democrats, the MSI, the Liberals and the Socialists were all pretty pissed off for being left out of the negotiations and feared their doom in the polls and elsewhere. After the death of Aldo Moro, Craxi realized that there was this big need of a complete change in the way of politics. What he needed was a party to be less about ideology but more about the people in it. If you think about it, that's very close to what we do today. Back in the Cold War, people didn't vote for the DC or for the PCI for the people, but for what they stood for. Craxi changed that. He revolutionized his party to stay more on track with the times. Craxi tackled the issue and the interests of middle class. Instead of talking down to them about what socialism should be, he started wearing jeans and appearing on TV often to talk about music and movies. He also tackled addiction and proposed to lower taxes. Craxi also became a great friend of Silvio Berlusconi, the Milanese entrepreneur founder of Mediaset, who also revolutionized Italian media by providing Italians with an alternative form of entertainment on the small screen other than Rai, the state-owned TV, which was highly censored and kind of boring. While the old political establishment mostly ignored private TV at first, or even tried to take it down, Craxi embraced it. People watching Rete 4, Canale 5 and Italia Uno turned in during commercial breaks to see Craxi's advert, where he briefly talked about a small issue like needles in the park or old age pensions. His methods were extremely innovative. He always held a carnation flower that represented love and affection, and looked at the camera blinking, winning the admiration of young and old voters. The PSI also began to gain more support thanks to Sandro Pertini, the old socialist partisan who became president of the Republic in 1978 and held beautiful speeches at the end of every year. By 1983, the Socialist had reached 11%. Many people at this point started to lose faith on the old establishment due to the tension strategy and the discovery of the P2 secret society. Seeing his rampant popularity, Pertini insisted in nominating Craxi as prime minister. 4 parties gave their vote of confidence: the DC, the Republicans, the Social Democrats, and the Liberals. The Pentapartito was born. Now, technically, the Pentapartito had formed its cabinets in 1981 with Forlani and later Spadolini, but Craxi's government stands out because it lasted a whopping 4 years, which is impressive. Craxi tackled many issues in his long government. He applied a Keynesian economic model, where he spent a lot on public works and projects that boosted the economy and increased support, but also increased the public debt. Craxi also started his war on drugs, something similar to Ronald Reagan's in the good and the bad way. In foreign policy, Craxi relied less on the US as an ally and built stronger relations with the European neighbors, specifically Germany. The cabinet only fell in 1986 after the Sigonella crisis involving a Palestinian terrorist who was wanted both in Italy and the US for hijacking an Italian ship and killing Jewish American civilians respectively. Craxi didn't want to send the man to the US because he wanted him to pay for his crime in Italy, because they caught him there. This infuriated Spadolini, the Republican Minister of Defense, who took back his vote of confidence. Check out Pertini's video if you want to know more about this diplomatic incident. Eventually the crisis was solved and Craxi remained in power until 1987. At the elections that same year, the PSI reached 14% of the votes, a great success, and so the Socialists remained in the Pentapartito throughout the entire 5-year legislature, taking part in the cabinets of Goria, De Mita, and Andreotti. Then the turning point. In February 1992, the Socialist MP Mario Chiesa was arrested for taking a bribe of 7 million lira from a cleaning service firm. Chiesa sought Craxi's protection for nearly a month, but Craxi accused them of casting a shadow on the most honest party in Italy. Feeling marginalized and now unjustly singled out, Chiesa divulged everything he knew to the prosecutors. His revelations brought half of the Milan socialists and industrialists under investigation. The magistrate Antonio Di Pietro began a judicial campaign against the political establishment. It started with the PSI, where billions of lire were revealed coming from illegitimate sources of finance, bribes. These bribes were coming from everywhere, from the smallest entrepreneur to the biggest mafia boss. In retaliation, in the summer of 1992, Craxi made a speech talking openly about the fact that every single party took part in this practice, and he was met with an embarrassing silence from the parliament. Craxi received his first prosecution notice in December 1992. More followed in January and February, at which point the Court of Milan explicitly asked Parliament to authorize Craxi's prosecution for bribery and corruption. At the time, Italian MPs were immune from prosecution unless authorized by Parliament. The authorization was denied on the 29th of April 1992. 1933, after Craxi gave an emotional speech. However, upon coming out of the Hotel Rafael, where he lived, he received a salvo of coins that members of the Democratic Party of the Left and the right-wing Italian social movement threw at him as a sign of their disgust. The parliament eventually allowed Craxi to go to court, and Craxi openly admitted his crimes and justified himself, saying that everyone else was doing it and that he was just playing the same game. Initially, Craxi's plea wasn't believed in. The establishment hoped to use him as some sort of sacrificial lamb so that they could continue their business without any interference from the public. In order to avoid his unjust fate, Craxi fled to Tunisia, where he remained until his death, which was caused by the fact that that same establishment refused to let him come back and seek treatment. Today we know that Craxi was right, even Di Pietro admitted it. Everyone from the biggest to the smallest party received funds that were unaccounted for, and many of these sources remain a mystery. The communists received funds from the USSR, the Christian Democrats from organized crime, the Republicans and the Social Democrats from the US, and the Socialists and the Liberals from Italian businesses. Keep in mind though that none of these except the PCI ones are 100% confirmed, but chances are that this is the mainframe of the situation. Corruption aside, Craxi hasn't left that much of a positive impact on our memories. The 1992 economic crisis was almost exclusively caused by the deficit spending. However, in his defense, it wasn't too different from what his predecessors had done just a few years before. Today's Craxi's legacy lives on in the way people do politics. His methods were successfully replicated by Berlusconi and later by the entire political class. His ideas are also brought forward by his family and many members of Forza Italia, like Brunetta, Bonifair and Caldoro. Renzi has also said many times that he agrees with Craxi and thinks that his memory should stay preserved. In my humble final opinion, I think the entire Republican history should be studied, not just Craxi, and my hopes are that in the near future these things will be taught at Italian schools. While you guys deal with that, I will do my part by teaching foreigners about it. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you like the things I do, consider donating to my Subscribe Star to get a VIP status on my Discord and to vote in my patrons only poll each month. Feel free to also check out the new merch at my store and to subscribe and like the video. This season comes to an end and I think we have made a lot of progress. Now I'm going to focus on my thesis. Stay tuned for Season 4 of Italian Politician of the Week, which will start next month. Have a good day guys, and I will see you next time.